and front in order to make
Yeah, go ahead. No,
in
go
order
ahead.
to make the back lining drawing
Mhm.
pattern
Yeah,
and whatever else was. I think maybe the front canvas or something.
the neck facing.
Mine were all over the place, so it didn't fit at all once I got it out. So I was glad I was kind of trialing on this pink
Okay.
cotton, and so I just had to redo all of those. But
It's all
I couldn't
practice.
get my pattern pieces to lie flat like you had. They just wouldn't go. So in the end, I ended up making new pattern pieces actually from the fabric cut out for the body.
There you go.
I felt that was so that's yeah.
So how's everyone else doing?
Ta-da.
Nice.
That's the the lining bit thing.
Yes. How's everybody else doing? Crickets, crickets.
I'm too busy working on the raglan coat, but I've
Okay,
made huge progress with that one. So
that's fair. This is not a race, so you can take as long as you wish on this because the videos are going to be up for the foreseeable future. Yeah, this is something that apparently you know, my friend Linda Maynard and I are a little bit kind of different than other people because apparently in some classes there's like an end point to the video. But because see, I just what I say is like don't pass the links around because you paid for this. So even my students at FIT, because all of the videos I had to make for FIT, I tell them the same thing. Don't pass these around because
Right.
um, I have to make money off of these. But I don't know if I told you all, I signed the contract for the doll book. So
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
that's
So
great.
that's I'm a little bit nervous because the gal that is running the book division, we're meeting, and I'm of course like, come on, lady, this is I have to get this turned in by June 1st. I thought I was going to have till June 30th, which is still kind of a tight deadline. And so so last week I was kind of freaking out, like, oh my God, am I ever going to get it done? I will get it done because I am, I deadlines are my thing. And my friend Jackie said, dude, you have this stuff already. You have the patterns, you have the knowledge. You just have to get it down. And so this week, because I'm trying to work ahead as much as possible until I talk to her on March 7th, I realized just how many patterns I have. Because yesterday, and it'll be what I do this afternoon, is copying off all these little tiny patterns, making fresh copies so that, those can go to whomever they need to go. But yeah, it's exciting. I'm excited and a little bit apprehensive because the story that I want to tell is her name is Lola. She was a showgirl. She wears feathers in her hair, but no dress cut down to there. And after the unpleasantness with Tony and Rico, she kind of lost her way and ended up in rehab. And now she has come to visit her friends, the Orlov Walensky triplets, a rollerblading girl group from Eastern Europe. And they're going to bring her to the Kenneth D. King studio to create a new wardrobe for her new life. That's the premise. So I'm hoping, because the CEO of Taunton seemed to be okay with this, I'm hoping that we're not going to have any like, oh, we can't have her in rehab, or it's like this. I want this to be a book that adults will enjoy too. So, so yeah, so it is what it is. So yes, I'm going to be scrambling and getting it done, but there you have it. So I'm actually kind of excited because this could turn into a series if this first one takes off, which would be kind of nice. So, okay, so questions. Thoughts, requests, hopes, fears, dreams, desires.
I have a
I have a
question.
question.
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
carry on.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Brenda.
Yes, my question is when you did your showed us how to do the insert of the lining along the collar with the corner
Yes.
construction. So if you had a fabric that was maybe a little bit could unravel or looser, would you have to sort of secure your corner, or how do you deal with that?
What I would first do is I would put some fusible underneath that corner. on both sides, on the facing, on the facing and on the lining side. And then you would stay stitch that little corner through the fusible interfacing, and that will keep everything from shredding and unraveling.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Joe, did you have one?
Yeah, I did. It was so I've just started cutting out the velvet version.
Okay.
I've only done the sleeves so far, and I've made the most stupid error because my nap is the wrong way. So does it matter if they're all the same? Does it matter if it breaks up rather than down?
Well, no, you see, I've seen that on some velvet sometimes and on furs. I remember one time I saw this fur coat, and the question was like, why did they run the nap up instead of down? And it was because it created a more matte finish. That was the explanation. It could very well have been that they cut it upside down, but as long as everything is consistent, it's all good. And if people ask you, you just say, I really like the way it looked.
Yeah, it's deliberate now. Okay, I will carry on.
Okay, Fred Astaire used to say, if you make the same mistake long enough, they assume it's your style.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That will save me a load.
Yeah, you just wear it with your head held high, and no one will, my guess is the only people who might ask are people who sew. Everyone else will just think you're brilliant because you're making your own clothes. Okay. Okay. So other questions? Okay, Riva, how was the Caribbean, or was it the Caribbean?
It was Cancun. Is that the Caribbean? The Caribbean? So it was great. I have a lot of catching up to do though, because we were gone for like 8 days, and it was like right in the middle. So I need to get back and look at everything on Monday or today, and then have more questions for you next week. But it was beautiful and sunny, and I've never done Cancun, so it was great.
Well, I saw that and I thought, oh, I don't think she's going to be working. But that's okay. I mean, how often do you get to go to Cancun? I have never been.
Never. Yeah. So never. And that's why before I signed up, I'm like, can we miss days? Because that was the one where I was a little worried about. So.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, let's just jump right in, because we're going to be making the vent today. And so that the little vent guide, that PDF I sent you, this is where that comes in. This is where that will make some sense, because one of the things I figured out with this particular pattern is this is how to handle it with to send you a template so that you can cut both on the fold, but then the two different sides of the vent will finish differently. Okay, so let us begin. And as usual, if you have a question, don't be shy. Just, shout out, and we will begin.
Our next operation in constructing the body of this jacket is to sew the vent. Now, let's just have a look at this. Zoom in a little bit here. So there is what's called the overlap. And this that extends past is called the underlap. So now looking at these two parts, the overlap is going to get a mitered corner. I'll just bring this up to the camera. That is going to be a mitered corner, whereas the underlap is going to sew with the seam right at the edge. Now I'm showing you these because on the underlap, we're going to be trimming the overall hem allowance. I'm going to diagram that as we get started, but this seam needs to extend out here. This is a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the underlap. So this is the front, and I would like now to show you the back. And this is what the vent looks like from the back. As you can see, we have a Hong Kong binding. All of the seam allowances are going to press to the left. So we have the one binding that comes down to here. And that finishes the underlap. And then there is a binding that finishes the overlap. This will all be hand stitched down later. And then on the overlap, we have the mitered corner. So, as you can well guess, this is a lot of work. So we should get busy. This is the setup for the vent. We cut everything the same just because it's easier to cut. And so the shaded area here is marked out here. And the shaded area here is marked out here. So what the shaded area represents is what we're going to trim from each of these vent extensions to create the two halves of the vent. On what is going to be the overlap on the vent, this actually will fold. We're going to cut here. This away. Then cut this way. So you can see we've trimmed a 1/2 inch here, and we've trimmed out this up here. So this here represents this here. So this is the overlap side of the vent. Next, we'll trim the underlap side. So on the underlap side, we're going to make the clip here and trim all of this out here. The distance, I'm going to zoom in a moment so you can see. The distance between here and here is also the distance between here and here. So as you saw when I was showing you the finished sample, we want to sew a seam here. So we want to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's why this little area here will jog out. So now let's zoom back out. So I'm going to make a clip here. And then with the rotary cutter, move that out of the way and trim the 1/4 inch off like so. So if I zoom in a little bit, you can see this here is what I have trimmed off of here. So now that we have prepared the 2 different sides of the vent, we can start construction. So on the overlap side, this is going to fold back like so. So what we want to do here is we want to put the Hong Kong binding right sides together, and it only has to go down to there. But we're going to pin it and sew it. And since I have covered how to add the Hong Kong binding earlier, I'm going to just do that and bring you back the results. So now we have the overlap side and we have the Hong Kong binding applied. So next step is applying the binding to the underlap side. So a little explanation. As you saw in the finished sample, all the seam allowances are going to press this way. So when we sew the binding to the underlap side, we're not sewing it right sides together. We're going to sew the binding with the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the fabric. And we will sew all the way down to here, but we will turn we're going to turn the binding back here. So let me pin this in place and I will bring it back and show you the result. So we've started up here, and notice you don't have to go all the way up to the top because you don't want to add bulk. That's going to be under the lining. But we have started pinning right side of the bias strip to the wrong side of the fabric all the way down. And so then, as you can see here, I made a mark right there. So I'm going to stop the stitching right there because, see, ultimately this will fold back to finish the end of that bias strip, but only after I've sewn it down. So I will take this over to the machine and sew it down and bring it back. So as you can see, I've sewn and I've pressed the bias strip back. Now I'm just going to zoom in here to show you. See, I pressed, after I stopped the stitching, I pressed the bias strip back right on that point right there. So our next step, a little explanation here. Clean this out. Okay. From here to here, we want a completely finished bias. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll that over. But this finish will stop, right about here. And then from there up, when I roll this over and press it, I will stitch as we did before. So I really felt you should see this. So that's why we're over here at the ironing pressing table. So what you want to do is you want to press that seam down. You want about 1/8 of an inch between the cut edges of the bias strip and the wool. So let me just press this because we're going to bring this over and hand finish it. So pressing it beforehand is going to make it finish much more nicely. And so we stop right about there where the curve begins. See, then what we can do is bring this up and over like so and hand finish that. So what I will do off camera, I'm just going to slip stitch this closed. Then I will bring it back so we can finish the binding. So almost done slip stitching this binding. And just nail this little corner down. And secure the thread. And I like to bury the end of the thread because that way you don't have it popping back at you. Okay, so now let me just pull out so you can get a sense of where we're going with this. Okay. That is the first step. So now what we want to do, let me just get this out again. So from here, we're going to press the bias strip back. And the rest of this binding will be finished by machine as we did the other bindings. So I will sew this on the machine and we'll meet you back at the work table. So here we have the binding. Now it's sewn by machine from the top end all the way down to this curve. I'll show you what it looks like from this side. So you can see that the machine stitching stops here for closing the binding, and then the hand sewing starts here and finishes here. So now we have both halves of the back panel. The next step is sewing the center back seam. So what I did here is I matched the two tailor tacks and I removed them because you don't want to catch them in the stitching. And we're going to be using a 7/8 inch seam allowance. So we're going to back tack here and then sew backwards all the way up to the neck. So I will go up to the machine, sew that, and I will meet you at the pressing table. So here we have the seam back from the sewing machine. So the first stop really is to press as sewn down to where the seam ends. Now from here, turn this way. So what we want to do now is to trim this seam allowance to 1/4 inch. And so what that's going to look like there we are. And for the next step, we're going to press all the seam allowances one way. So we're going to set this up. Let's see, raise this up a little bit. Okay, there. So down here, I'm not going to press anything below this just yet. I want to get the seam allowances positioned above the vent before I work on below the vent. So we continue all the way up. Okay, so that is step one. Now, I'm going to go back and look at the vent. So we have, this is what's called the overlap. We're going to fold, and that fold is really going to blend straight down from the seam. So it's good to fold it and then press it like this with the underlap covering. So now let me just let this cool for a moment and then take this off and turn it over to show you where we're going. So see, there is our vent. And that is the overlap. And you can see how the crease just blends right into the seam. Now, back to the work table.
So I'm going to stop here and see if anyone has any questions. Questions, hopes, fears, dreams, desires.
I had a question. When you were, you mentioned when you were sewing the center back seam that you would sew backwards from the tack. Was there a reason why you went up towards the neckline instead of down? Is it just because you know where that tack is, or because of the hang?
A little both. Notice that the seam allowance is faced towards the left. So when you put it into the machine, you want the seam allowances to the right of the stitching line. So it just makes it easier to go through the machine. So there's no secret about directional sewing or anything like that. It's just since everything is pressing to the left, it's easier to sew from the top of the vent up to the neck.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yvonne here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I missed the first 3 classes, so possibly you've covered this, but that do-bobby that you used to press the
you mean
one way, what is that?
the seam roll? And if let's just roll this back.
It's really long and skinny. I've never seen one that.
You can make them yourself. So let's see, come back. Where are we? Up there we are. Yeah. Yes, what this is, let me just, this is railing, like hardwood railing, like, on the top of a stairwell.
Mm-hmm.
And so really what, you just go to the lumber yard and hardwood is better. And what I like about it is the curved surface, you can really mash down on your seam allowance because you mash down on your seam because then you don't have to worry about the seam allowances embossing into the fabric around them. And the beauty of this, because you see, I used to use just a wooden dowel, but the drawback with that was that it's cylindrical and it rolls off the table. But this has a flat bottom, so it just sits perfectly square. So that's what that is. It's called a seam roll. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so other questions?
And that's covered with felt?
I like to cover it. I have 2 of them. I have one covered with muslin. I have one covered with just wool flannel. So the muslin one is for smooth fabrics. The one covered in wool is for wools.
So there's no felt underneath that?
No, you want it to be rigid. You want to have a hard pressing surface on that.
All right, okay.
Okay, so other questions?
Kenneth,
Yes.
I put your link to your seam roll article in Threads Magazine in the chat.
Oh, hey.
It was very easy to make. I used that to make mine.
Yeah, there. Thank you, Nia. Yeah, see, there it is right there. If you want to see how I did it, because I wrote, and I also, I think it was in the last couple of days. If you're on my Instagram, I did a little kind of tool time with the different seam rolls. So it's one of those tools that until you have it, you don't really realize how much it adds to your construction. Okay, so other questions? Okay, so I think, let's see. Let's go back to where. Okay, so now we're going to sew the top of the vent. So.
So at the work table, what we want to do is we want to pin, this is called the return. We want to pin the return of this overlap to here. So we want to line up the thread tracing. And then I'm going to pick this up and fold it this way because I'm going to make a stitch. Actually, I will just draw that. We're going to sew the return to the back. So this is going to be a stitching line. And we're just sewing through just these two layers. So we're going to go over to the machine and sew that. So here we are. You don't have to start dead in line with this row of stitching. You could start in a little tiny bit, about a 1/4 inch or so, because we just want to sew the top of these two together. Tack. Remove the work from the machine. Let's have a look at it. There we are. So you can see we have just sewn from here to here. And on the back, that is the stitching. We're going to be sewing another row of stitching here and down, but we have to go over back to the table to pin it first. So I will see you back at the work table. So back from the work table, again, we want to make sure that all of this lines up. And there is the row of stitching that we sewed last time. Now, what I'm going to do here is draw a line. And this can be 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch above the original line. So that is going to stitch here because it's actually going to run into the seam. Here is the seam. So it's going to run, let me zoom in. There, okay, sorry about that. Okay, so yes, this line here is going to be parallel to the stitching line we just sewed. So there is the center back seam. And then we're going to sew from here to here, and then we're going to sew down to here. But we want to have everything pinned before we go back to the machine. Okay, so this is all set up and ready for sewing. So we're going to begin the stitching. So that is the original stitching we sewed in the last step. So I'm going to start the stitching there. So up along this binding and then turn. We're going to sew parallel to this row here. We'll stop that right at the seam line. Okay, so let me take this out of the machine. First, I'll let you have a look here to see what we've accomplished. So let me take this out of the machine and trim the threads, and I will show you the results. So here is the result. Now you can see the second stitching hides the upper end of this facing. And that right there is the original tailor tack. So we have really encased that upper end in a rather handsome way. Now, let's go back to the work table.
I'm just going to brag for a moment. I figured that one out myself. Just saying.
Now, as you can see, I've worked ahead. And what we're just doing here, like we did on the seam allowances on the fronts, we're just going to slip stitch, or blind stitch actually, blind stitch the seam allowances down and stop right about there. And so what this will do is it's going to give you a completely finished back vent. You don't have any raggedy edges showing anywhere. So let me just do a couple more stitches. Okay, so then I'm going to just secure it there while the police are outside. We have a firehouse close by. It's such a comfort. Okay. Now, so let me pull back out and give you a view of what we have accomplished. So we have bound this seam and pressed it to one side, and we've created a really nice finish here. And we have the overlap and the underlap. Now, you're probably wondering, how do we resolve these ends? We have to wait until we sew the body back to the body fronts and bind the hem allowances before we do that. So I'm going to go off camera and accomplish that, and I will bring you back the results. So here you can see that we have sewn all the vertical seams together on the body. And you can also see down here, I have bound one side, but I want to show you over here. Before you put the binding on, you want to engage in preemptive grading because you don't want all of this bulk sitting back here. Now, also, if you look up at the armholes, preemptive grading. So this is something you do kind of to set everything in place. And again, over here, preemptive grading. So as you can see, I have one binding complete. So now I will go off camera and add the other binding, because once we have the bindings on, we can then finish the end of the vent.
So questions before we continue? I see there's something in the chat. The cute little tool he's using. Okay, what that is called is a chalk wheel. Clover makes them. They make different configurations, but what I do like about the chalk wheel is that it marks a really crisp line. So that's what that is. So other questions?
Yes. Did you have preemptive grading underneath the horsehair?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. It's just good
Thank
to, any time that you think that you're going to have a ginormous seam allowance or two sitting in a place where another seam is going to cross it, it's a good idea to get rid of that. Then you don't have all that bulk hanging out inside.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Okay, well, back to the story.
And before I actually demonstrate this next step in fabric, that it's useful to demonstrate it in paper. So this is our vent. What we want to do is create a mitered corner. So this is the fold line of the vent. This is the fold line of the hem. So what I like to do first is to fold up the hem. And then we also have the fold on the vent itself. So we have these two crease lines, one here, one here. So the next step, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So I like to fold up one and fold over the other. Now, it doesn't matter which you fold first, but what you're looking for, you can see where those two edges intersect. I like to make a mark. So there is one, and there is the other. Okay. So we have this mark here and this mark here, which then are going to meet in the final garment. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make a dimple here and a dimple here and translate these marks to the back of the paper. Okay, so now I can zoom out a little bit. So now, wrong side of the fabric. So how you determine the miter is you draw as a line from this mark to the intersection of the corner, and same here. Now, if this is a 90-degree angle, these will be straight, but this is not a 90-degree angle, so you're going to have a little bit of a bend on this pencil line. So the next step here would be, if we want to sew it, we're going to put the right sides together. We're going to match these two points, and we're going to pin So then when we start sewing, we're going to start sewing here, back tack, and it will sew down to here. So just to give you a little, since this is paper, not as amenable to sewing. So when you turn it right side out, if you were to turn it right side out, you will have a miter that reflects that angle. So this little sidebar is going to explain what we're going to be sewing next.
So did that make sense to everybody? Hello? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Looks
Okay.
great.
You know, I just found when teaching this, because, you know, FIT has been kind of a good teaching laboratory. I find that it's easier to see in paper kind of what's happening before we go to fabric. So now we're going to go to fabric.
Okay, just to clarify, so you're
Here we
doing,
are back.
Go ahead.
you're
Question?
doing the mitering with the Hong Kong binding in place so that that's going to get caught up in the miter. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, it's much easier that way, much cleaner. Okay.
At the vent. And so that is the fold of the vent. And this is the fold of the hem allowance. So what I'm looking at is I want the intersection of these two. I'm going to put a pin here for the vent and a pin here for the hem allowance. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to mark 2 dots on these edges to show you where the folded edge here meets the folded edge here, and I will bring you back the results. So here, I'm back. I have marked, let me just zoom in here. I've marked a dot here. I've marked a dot here. And I also drew chalk line for the folded edge of the hem and the folded edge of the facing. So that's the intersection point. So the next step here is going to be drawing, and you draw these separately. Drawing from this point to here, and then same thing from this point to here. Okay. Now that we have the lines drawn, we are going to match these 2 points, putting the fabric right sides together. There they are. Put a pin right there. Then I'm going to pin all the way back to the corner. And I like to check and make sure, yeah, it's the same on both sides. So the next step, I'm going to go to the machine. I'm going to start here, back tack, sew down, and back tack here. And then I will meet you at the pressing table. So we're back from the machine. You can see that I have sewn from there all the way down to here. And so first, press as sewn. Then you want to trim the seam allowances to 1/4 inch. And then you want to clip this corner like so. So from here, this is where we get the point presser. And we put this in. And we open up the seam allowance and press this open. There we go. So we allow that to cool. And then set the point presser aside. And we turn this right side out. And with the point turner, crisp up that corner. And so I'm going to put this back on the pressing board. Now, use some organza on this, just press it. There. So that then is the mitered corner. And so it doesn't hurt now to just start setting this up. And yes, it's noon, which is lunchtime. Okay, back to the work table. We're back from the pressing table, And here is the miter that we just sewed. Now you notice I have removed the thread tracing from the hem and the edge of the vent, but I have basted all the hem allowances in place. I like to stop the basting right on this front seam because we're going to need to leave this part loose to install the facing. So I've retained the thread tracing here. So we have half of this finished. Now the other half, this is where move everything just a little bit this way. There we go. Okay. So the object here, oops, the object here, when you are finished, is that, see, there's the fold. You want the back part of the vent to be maybe 1/8 of an inch shorter than the front. You don't want this hanging out underneath. It looks sloppy. And so, if you remember, we cut this little jog out here and we folded this back. And I'm going to trim that down so that everything matches. So what we want to do here, right sides together. Turn this way. So I'm going to right sides together. And see what you can do then with your right sides together is you can really get that binding up against the bottom of this binding here. And this is one of those times I pin perpendicular. So the stitching line, just so you understand, the stitching line is going to go straight down from here down. It's a roughly 1/4 of an inch seam, maybe a little less, but I like to have it so that when you turn it, everything here is in alignment. So it's just, again, we're going to stitch a back tack and stitch it down to here, back tack. Then after I've sewn this on the machine, I will meet you at the pressing table. So you can see I've sewn down, and first press as sewn. Then I like to clip this corner. And before I do anything else, I'm going to press this open on the point presser. So we press this open. Now I'm going to trim this little bit of seam allowance out so it doesn't show in the final product. And then let's turn this right side out. Like so. Now I'm going to press that. This over here. So we'll press all of this here. And that's what it's going to look like. When I get back to the table, I'm going to hand stitch these together so that it presents a nice appearance. But what I will do now is, as I did before, I'm going to set a crease at the hem. And I will meet you back at the work table. So here we have everything sewn, and this is going to be a final little finishing touch here. I like to do, because you need to sew these two edges together anyway. So why not sew it and make it pretty? So I'm going to use a buttonhole stitch. We've sewn that before, but it bears repeating. So I'm going to start right there. That hides the knot. And then we sew. We come up through the loop. We just continue that. Now let me zoom in just a little more so you can see it better. This falls in the category of not necessary, but pretty. Because if you can make it pretty, why not? Okay, we're coming up to the end. So there. And then you can just bury the thread and trim. So you have cleaned that up nicely. So let's survey what we've just created. Here we have the finished vent from behind, and you can see we've finished the underlap and we've finished the overlap. Now the hems are all basted in place because we will hand finish that later. Let me just zoom in for a moment so you can see a little closer. So see, it's finished nicely here, finished nicely here. All of the seam allowances are pressed to one side. And that is what the overlap looks like. Now, let's turn this over and have a look at it from the front. So here is the jacket from the front. So now I'm going to zoom in here. There's the vent. This is the overlap. This is the underlap. Now, if you have a little bit of overhang, I like the front to sit about 1/8 of an inch below the back, because when you're wearing it, it will camouflage and it will read as straight. So the finishing of the hem allowances and such are going to work later. But what we want to do for the next step, I've worked ahead and I've set this up. We're going to be sewing the shoulder seams and the neck seams. And so here on the collar, where the collar joins the shoulder, I've sewn a very short stay stitch. There we are, following the cut edge of the canvas. So you want to sew this because this is going to set us up for the next lesson. So the vent. We're done.
Oh, hang on. So are your brains full? You know, it looks like a nothing vent, but you know, it takes a little doing. And like I said, I figured that one out myself because the vents that I normally see in unlined jackets, I just think I don't like them. I think they're too clunky. So this seemed to work really well. So questions? Are you all just like ready for your nap now? Well, I think our job for today is done. I'm going to turn the recording off now, but if you want to